So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at economic trends as part of our STEEP model. Obviously, the economy is always going to have a real major impact on our business decisions. We need to always be thinking about what's the economy doing, where's it going, what's coming up down the track, and and how that might affect us. So the economies are continually in a state of flux, okay? And as marketers, our role, or one of our roles, is to identify the direction of the market in order to provide some valuable information and guidance for the decision makers in the organisations we work with. Okay, so, and at the core of those trends are the concept of supply and demand, which we'll go into, and we'll have a bit of a talk about how that might be affected. Okay, so really what we've got is we've got a bunch of economic trends. We start to look in terms of production and what that means. We start thinking about terms of consumption, scarcity, supply and demand, as well as the total revenue. Okay, now obviously economics in a bit of a nutshell is the social science that analyses the production, distribution and consumption of goods and services. Okay, so really we can watch what the markets are doing there and start to see, well, what are people actually out there doing? And what we start to look at is we start to look at the actual economies and how the economic agents actually work with each other. Economic analysis, it's applied throughout society, in business, finance, government, etc. In other words, people want to know what's the money doing. Okay, so what's the money doing and what opportunities does that present, or what risks and dangers is that going to create for us? Now, in economics, production is the act of creating goods and services to satisfy a want or a need. Okay, so that's what we're talking up here. We're talking in terms of production. Okay, there are three major factors of production of goods and services, and the first one obviously is labour. Okay, so all forms of labour, or all forms of human input is covered by the term labour, both the physical and mental intercurrent production. Okay, so either people are working with their hands, they're working with their minds, but ultimately we've still got people involved in the process. Okay, when we're producing something, there are people involved in it. Now, we could be looking just at the skills, or we could just be looking at, the physical effort required. So there's a few things to think about in that. We start to also talk in terms of land and raw materials. Okay, so inputs into production that are derived or, provided by nature. For example, unimproved land and mineral deposits in the ground. Obviously, Australia, we're a country that has a lot of mining and agriculture. We're very quick to pull things out of the ground, so we start to look at those natural resources. We need to look at land such as farmland in order to grow crops, etc. And if you're in I suppose if you're in leisure and travel, you need to be thinking about beaches or whatever else it happens to be that you can use as your means of production. We also start to look at terms of capital, and when we're talking about capital, anything that have been a product, for instance, factories, machines, computers. So we start to look at all those assets and resources that allow us to continue to produce goods and services. Okay, so consumption in economics is seen as its relationship to production. Okay, it's the use of goods or services to satisfy the needs or wants, and that usually involves purchasing the goods and services. Okay, so how much people are consuming. Scarcity starts to talk about it's a central economic problem. It states that society has insufficient resources in order to fulfill the human wants and needs. When there's not the right number of things around, or when we can't easily get access to it, obviously the prices go up, and that starts to have a lot of impact on us because people have a demand for something they can't get enough of. It can also imply that not all the society's goals can be pursued at the same time. Okay, trade-offs are being made for one good against another, and we see this in when we went back to environmental impacts. Once again, tropical cyclones came through, wiped out a lot of the banana crops up in Queensland, and all of a sudden Australia, who enjoy our summer fruits, particularly things like bananas, we couldn't get them, and the price went from about $1.99 a kilo up to about $15 odd a kilo if you could find them, and the bananas weren't the best quality, but there was that massive demand, but there wasn't a whole lot of actual stock around. So that certainly is something that you need to start thinking about. Scarcity also relates to goods and services that are, that are scarce become economic goods. Other goods are called free goods. Okay, so if they're desired but in such abundance they're not scarce, such as air and seawater. Okay, so free goods. There's plenty of it. It's just lying around. We can get access to it without any sort of real problem. Supply and demand is the most fundamental concepts of economics. Okay, it's the backbone of a market economy. That there is a certain amount of supply going in and there's a certain amount of demand drawing on that. So demand refers to how much of a product or service is required. Okay, so how much people want it. Okay, so the quantity demanded is the amount of a product people are willing to buy at a certain price. Okay, so there is a point that people will get to where they're not prepared to pay it, but generally what we're looking at is, how much do people want it? A good example of supply and demand is we see that a lot with launches of a particular electronic manufacturer that has a piece of fruit as a logo. We start to see that supply and demand. They play with that quite a lot by only releasing a certain amount to create that feeling of exclusivity. They have those big opening days where everyone's high-fiving and running down to buy the latest gadget, and of course they sell out of that gadget very quickly. That starts to drive up price and interest. Okay, so the relationship between price and quantity demanded is known as the demand relationship. Okay, so we think about, well, if there's a large supply and no demand, okay, prices are going to start dropping straight down because, there's heaps of it and no one really cares. On the other hand, if the supply goes down and there's quite a high demand for a good, obviously the price is going to go up. So we need to start thinking about where are we in that, in that trade-off, and how does it going to affect us in the longer term. Okay, so supply, it represents how much the market can offer. Okay, the quantity supplied refers to the amount of a certain good that they're willing to supply when receiving a certain price. Okay, so the same for the suppliers. They need to think about what price are they prepared to sell for. Okay, the relationship between the price and how much of a good or service supplied is the supply relationship. Price, therefore, is a reflection of supply and demand. Okay, simply put, large amount of supply, little demand, price goes down. Large amount of demand, small amount of supply, price goes up. If there's a supply and demand and they're roughly equal, well, that's going to give you that equilibrium, and then it comes down to how much you're selling for, etc. Now, supply is always going to be related to resources because goods and services are always related to our ability to actually obtain the resource to supply them. Okay, so we need to acquire enough resources to match our supply targets. So if I'm a printing house, obviously I'm selling books, but I still need to get the paper in order to provide the goods or services. Okay, once again, those bananas, if I'm selling fruit smoothies and I have to pay $15 a kilo for my bananas, well, $15 a kilo means that the smoothie price has to go up, or I have to think about, can I even supply that? Even though there's a demand for it, it might not be cost effective to do so. Okay, if we can't get the resources, it's going to lead to a supply shortfall, and we see that in quite a lot of markets, particularly oil, where oil prices start to rise up, and that starts to have an effect on companies and their ability to provide goods and services. Okay? What it does is it means the cost per unit has to go up. So once again, in the bananas, if bananas are $1.99 a kilo, and I'm obviously selling a milkshake for $5, but now the banana, which is a major component, is $15, can I still charge $5 for the milkshake? Obviously not. Okay, so I need to think about my cost per unit going up, and whether or not the market's going to deal with that. On the other hand, as I say, if we have an oversupply of something, that's going to have the opposite effect. Okay, so the cost per unit will decrease, and the number of units produced will increase. All of a sudden, we'll have heaps of them lying around. We can make lots and lots. The problem is that there might not necessarily be the demand for the amount we're making, which can have a further effect of leaving us with more goods than are demanded. And if we end up with a whole pile of surplus goods, then we need to start thinking about where are we keeping them, etc. So it's going to have quite a lot of effects on us. Okay, we can't just put it in storage because that has that has a price attached to it. So demand. Okay, so when we start talking about the demand side of the equation, the premise of the economic problem model is that human wants are constant and infinite due to constantly changing demands. Okay, so people always want something. All right, there's always something they need, something they're looking to get. The question for us is, are we supplying it? But anyhow, that's a constant through human history, that people continually want things. Okay, given that people want a certain product and there is scarcity of resources, a demand will always be created. Okay, so people always want something. That's always going to vary about what those somethings are, but we need to think about, well, what's the supply of that? Okay, so there's going to always be some sort of demand, and it's always going to be drawing it forward. As the demand increases, the prices start to increase if the supply can't match that. Okay, so if more and more people want a particular type of good, and there's not a supply coming to back it up, the prices are going to go up with it. A good example is the Sydney housing market. In Sydney, house prices just seem to keep on going up and up and up and up. People keep saying there's going to be a bubble, the bubble's going to burst. I've been hearing that for the last 10 years. I'm sure at some point someone's going to be right. But in the meantime, we're starting to see a limited supply of housing and more people coming in and wanting it, and therefore there's a higher price to be paid for that. Okay, and that's just continued to have gone on for as long as I can sort of think. Okay, so what we end up then with is we end up with the total revenue test. Okay, in economics, the total revenue test is a means for determining whether demand is elastic or inelastic. Okay, if an increase in price causes an increase in total revenue, then demand is said to be inelastic, okay, since the increase in price doesn't have an impact on the quality demanded. In other words, as the price goes up, it's not slowing down our sales, we're still selling even at the higher price, so it's inelastic. If the increase in price causes a decrease in the revenue, then the demand can be said to be elastic, since the increase in price has an impact on the quantity. In other words, the bananas, okay, yes, they went up to 15 bucks a kilo. Yes, people were still buying it for that, but there would have been a lot less in the market. Okay, so therefore it's elastic. If they still sold the same amount, people still want toilet paper, for an example. You can raise the price of toilet paper, people are probably still going to buy it. Okay, it's not really an optional thing, so that's a little bit inelastic. Okay, so just to wrap that up, when we're starting to look at the economic factors, as we say, look at your production, start thinking about, what are the human costs there, think about your resources, etc. Those things are going to be affected, wage increases, etc., and your means of production. The consumption, how much people are using of the goods and services. Think about scarcity, okay, so the resources that you require, their availability is going to become a bit of an issue over time. You need to think about the supply and demand and make sure the relationship is correct there. There's no point being the 11th Thai restaurant on the same street because obviously if there's an oversupply, well, the demand's going to get divided. And I've seen that certainly happen over time. And then think about the total revenue test to see whether you have an elastic market or an inelastic market. So they're just some of the very key concepts to get a bit of an overall viewpoint of the economic factors, but certainly something that as a marketer, you need to be really getting on top of so that you can start to advise the stakeholders or give them some sort of guidance on the decisions that they can make as things continue to change, new opportunities are created and old opportunities start falling away. Don't be there with a massive oversupply of a product when the demand is falling away, okay? So you don't want to end up with a whole pile of junk that you can't actually get rid of now. All right, good luck with that and enjoy your marketing.